we're here. Screw you. You're not going to do anything. And guess who our buddy is? It's, Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. So the Chinese are there, the Iranians are there, the narcos are there, the money launderers are there, the gangs are leaving there and coming to the U.S. So, it's a true cluster, coming out of that country. And at some point, it's going to have to be dealt with.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original presented by First Form. Don't forget to check out your First Form supplements, especially the protein. You can go find that at firstform.com/borderland. Our next guest is Wesley Taber, who is a former DA agent and CIA assignee with over 20 years experience of tracking transnational criminal networks in Latin America. He focuses on this podcast on the cartel that we don't talk about often, that I'm excited we do today, Cartel de los Soles. Very strong presence in Venezuela. There's a lot to this podcast. I think you'll enjoy it. Go check it out. This is definitely an area that we haven't had a lot on the show, so there's going to be a lot of questions. This is all going to be very new to us. Even my producer, we were both like, we're going to just have to ask a lot of questions and have fun with this and see where we go.
No, what's new? Come on. There's all kinds of stuff in here. It's been around a long time.
This is stuff that no one on our show has ever talked about, really. So I'll get into that right now. Let me introduce you. First, Wesley, thank you so much for joining us on the show. You have an extensive background. If you don't mind, before we get into it, would you mind giving a brief bio of your background for the audience?
Sure. I started in law enforcement back in 88, 89, graduated in Philly Police Academy. I then became a sheriff deputy just north of Tampa, Florida in 1992. And I stayed there until 1998, until I joined the DEA. I did 3 overseas tours with DEA, and I worked in 7 of DEA's field divisions across the country. And I stayed with them for 23 years, as I said. And then when I retired, I decided I was going to go back into law enforcement. And I worked for the Seminole Indian Tribe, which the Seminole Indian Tribe handles Hard Rock International. So big venues, big events, big stars, everything from presidents to senators to, events like the Miss Universe pageant, for example. And I was a lieutenant with them, and I ran counterterrorism in the Homeland Security Department of the Seminole Indian Tribe. And then I left them. An agency buddy of mine had called, actually, it'd been my partner, and we worked for a very large company out of Madrid, Spain. It's probably the number 2 largest security company in the globe. And they started a new CONUS program to do high-end executive protection, analytics, intelligence, threats, and so forth in the United States. So it was myself, a former FBI guy, HSI guy, Marine, and CIA guy. And we did that for about a year. Then I left that, and I said, let me go back and get my old state pension. So I went back again. And I worked as a detective doing fraud cases for about a year and a half or so with the state of Florida. Then I retired again, and now I speak, consult, and do other things. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
I love it, man. That's many lives you've lived, essentially.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You're considered kind of a subject matter expert in the Cartel de los Soles, correct?
People will call me like, oh, you're an expert when I go on the news, whether it's Fox News or Newsmax or on newspapers. And I'm like, listen, I'm not an expert. I'm knowledgeable. I've been there. I've worked on the cases. I guess you could call me that, but I kind of hesitate to say, oh, I'm an expert. Well, anyone that studies something long enough could be an expert, but I'm pretty knowledgeable about it. I'm actually one of the only U.S. agents to ever met one of the members called Tarek el-Assignee, who is an actual terrorist. He's wanted by the U.S. government. And I had a couple of meetings with him, as well as other meetings with some other members of the cartel. I probably met with 4 to 5 of those members of the Cartel de los Soles. And, that cartel is proliferated around the world with some heavy duty money laundering and shipping of narcotics, as I'm sure we'll get.
Well, yeah, let me start there. So Cartel de los Soles is not a cartel that has been spoken a lot on this show. I've heard it in passing. We had a couple conversations with others, but what can you tell the audience about this cartel and how it's different from the Mexican cartel or similar?
Yeah, a lot of people don't really understand. And when they look at Venezuela, now we have a lot more highlighting of Venezuela with the Tren de Aragua, right? So, Tren de Aragua, the gang, they're coming, they're chopping people's fingers off, they're kidnapping, they're killing, doing all these crazy things, right? And people kind of paid attention a little bit to Venezuela. Well, Venezuela is about 1,400 miles off the coast of Florida, okay? Venezuela geopolitically has a very large presence when you look at it macro to micro. Let's go back and come out a little bit. We have Russia, we have China, we have Iran, we have proxies that train inside of Venezuela. We had Venezuela back in the day that was issuing their passport to a variety of people from nefarious action states in the Middle East, for example, right? And they would give background passports, like from infancy with birth certificates all the way through college in a stack and give it to them, and then they get a Venezuelan passport. Well, remember back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the Venezuelan passport was valuable, right? Now it's not very valuable, but for many, many years it was. And once you get that Venezuelan passport back in, say, 2000, you can go pretty much anywhere you wanted to. So what happened was you started having this crime dynamic within the country, the corruption that kind of bled over with the Hugo Chavez, who then became the president of the country. And he had been in prison because he did a, coup d'etat, and he tried to take the country over, and he was thrown in prison. Fast forward 6 years, what do? They pardon him. He's out in jail, and then he runs for president. He wins. And this is where you start looking at the Cartel de los Soles, because the Chavez regime wanted to take the United States and subvert it in many ways. One of the biggest ways was we're going to flood it with cocaine, we're going to flood it with narcotics, and we're going to, basically destroy the fabric of the United States of America in that aspect, right? Of course, they're going to send spies, they're going to do all this other stuff. But they are positioned in a region of the world in the Western Hemisphere where you have source country for cocaine. You have Colombia right next door. And what's in Colombia? The FARC, right? The armed forces, of Colombia. It's like a little, how can you put it in terms of what we would think in the United States? You have this group that says we're being undermined, kind of like an Antifa, but on steroids. And they want to take over because they feel they're being wronged in the country, and they have to make money. So what do? So many of these criminal groups, they exploit the cocaine trade. And then you have, everything, from all the Colombian cocaine kingpins back in the day with, Javier Pena, Steve Murphy, Chris Feistel, Dave Mitchell, all those DEA agents investigating these big narcos. Come back now again, knowing that you have all these huge cocaine sources in that region. Chavez says to himself, hey, self, I can help them. I can harbor these fugitives of justice, because as they're committing crimes, the Colombian government saying, we're going to arrest them and send them to the United States, right? We've seen this in the movies, when you're looking at all the cartels, they were all facing extradition to the United States. They didn't want that, because in Colombia, they could have, a nice little tennis court, they could have their booze, cable TV, the whole thing, and enjoy life,
Nice
right?
prison.
That's the way it was. Well, in Venezuela, they just pay a little bit of money and they're going to live the good life, right? Under the radar there, and basically under the wing of the Chavez government. So then you start having all these military individuals in the structure of the government becoming involved, because everyone wants a little mordita, a little bit of bite of the apple, right? Because they want to make money. And it evolved into this thing called the Cartel de los Soles, where our generals have, stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and then you have colonels and so forth. Well, the generals in Venezuela have little sons, soles, right? And that's where the Cartel de los Soles came into. But it kind of proliferated into government members, you have the president, you have the vice president, you have all the military commanders, and then you have figures that are way below captains, lieutenants, police officers, police chiefs. Everyone got involved in this. And as we fast forward through the 2 decades of Hugo Chavez, it turned into a behemoth, and they're sending tens of thousands of metric tons of cocaine to the United States through Venezuela. Ships, LPVs, aircraft, you name it, it's coming to the United States from Venezuela.
Yeah, that's crazy. I've never heard this side of the story because so much is focused on Mexico and just, in that space. I looked a little bit up on it, and it was just interesting to see, and you explained it really well. How did, when you were out there in your work, how big of an impact was that making in some of your investigation or some of the work you were doing? I know you can't talk heavily about what was going on, but their imprint compared to what you see in the Mexican cartels, is it pretty heavily established within the government, kind of like the corruption side of the Mexican cartel? I'm very curious of how similar they work, or is it very different in how they kind of use their power?
So the mechanics of how things operate are the same anywhere you go, right? You're like, well, are you an SMA on this? Well, yeah, but you know what? Anyone could be. Once you get the model, it's the same model for all of these things, right? In a sense, but we put it in perspective of where they're located, and it's a transit country, okay? They're not producing the cocaine there. They're not doing the labs there per se. That's in the Colombian end. And because they're neighbors, the FARC will use all the coca production, heroin, obviously the amapola, and they make the heroin and so forth. They bring it down the rivers. They use the geography to bring it right to Venezuela. That's where the Venezuelan military will grab it, bring it into Venezuela. Now it's safe. Now you don't have to worry about anything because it's blessed. The Monsignor has said, go forth and multiply, guys. It's not a problem, okay? They bring it in. They arrange the aircraft. They arrange military shipping. You'll have military trucks or police trucks transiting all this dope to where it's got to go in these airstrips. And then you would have thousands of flights a year leaving, or maritime vessels that would take off, right? So the mechanics is pretty much the same for any kind of transit country. But when you're looking at, you have basically a country from the top down to the street level guys that are capitalizing on it. And it's kind of similar in a sense when you look at Mexico, right? But they're not our border, right? But
Right.
borders are not as stretched as they used to be anymore, because in 2025, it doesn't take much for me to send 4 tons of cocaine to Central America. It doesn't take really that much of a difference from 2015 to 2025 to send it to the Caribbean corridor. We have a compressed border because what's going on, but we've seen this before. Again, the cycles, the sets are all the same. You squeeze the southwest border, what happens? You kind of trend to move it to the Caribbean, right? You have some play in Canada, a very small amount when it comes to fentanyl. You're talking, I think they seized 49 kilos last year. You have less than 1% of all seizure of fentanyl that goes through Canada. But what you have in Canada, and it's important because we have, the border is not just southern border. We're dealing with it all, right? We're dealing north-south, and really, even though we don't have territory per se, we kind of do, but we have east and west because it's all maritime, right? But so Canada is, a first world country that can help us combat, right? Even though they are ill-placed to kind of fight it because they're kind of, I don't want to say weak, but I'm going to say weak, okay? Unfortunately, Canada, they have some great strong points to them, but when it comes to heavy-duty law enforcement and what's driving a lot of crime is this expansion of the Mexican cartels into Canada and the motorcycle clubs and the alliances that are starting to take place up there, right? Okay. But in the scheme of things, Canada is very, very small. It's in an infancy stage of expansion. So now's the time to strike and cut that snake's head off beforehand. But as we move back to the southern border and we kind of piece this apart, and you look at Venezuela And going back to the original question, now that we've kind of gone the macro micro on it, their job is to provide a safe haven for all this cocaine that's transiting, but not just cocaine. We're talking criminal elements. And that's what was happening when I was down there. My job was to go down there, try to infiltrate into these organizations. And the organizations are the government heads, right? So I'm down there working with generals, meeting with these guys that are going to be indicted or have been indicted. And I have to have a poker face, right? I know what they're doing. I'm trying to gain evidence, right? I'm trying to find fugitives. We arrested 4 CPOTs, which is 4 kingpins when I was down there. So we wanted to eliminate the structure of their safe haven for the criminals. And we wanted to identify how they're transiting the cocaine, where they're transiting it. And third, we want to develop informants. We want to get people that can cooperate, and we want to make cases in the United States. So that's Venezuela's role in this whole thing. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, why were we a target for them? Why was there even an idea of like, let's go after America?
Well, I mean, listen, all around the world, America is vilified, right? You look at certain countries, when President Putin looks at us, he might kind of say, well, I kind of respect them, but does he really respect the United States of America? I doubt it. Does Iran, death to America, Iran, respect us? They fear us, right? Because we just destroyed their military element and their potential for nuclear missiles, right? But they don't respect us, right? So when you look at Venezuela and the shift in 1995, 1996, when Hugo Chavez says, Socialismo, I remember on the radio when I was there, he would come over the radio. It was very Cuban-esque, just like Cuba. So take Cuba and Venezuela and just kind of throw those together for the people that are listening to this and do a comparison, because it's very, very, very similar, with the exception of Cuba didn't have the resources that Venezuela had. Venezuela was the creme de la creme of South America back in the 50s and 60s. I mean, they were rocking the oil petroleum. The Orinoco Belt is one of the largest reserves of, it's a heavy oil. It's a heavy oil, obviously, down in South America there, but it can be refined and ask Chevron. They've been down there for, many decades, drilling and pumping. So, but you have to remember, we are not loved and adored around the world, because oftentimes they're going to look at us and they're going to say, you know what? They're exploiting our country. They're doing this to our country. These Americans come in. You look in France, you have this kind of animosity sometimes. And we have, 130,000 soldiers that are buried in different cemeteries,
Yes.
in the French countryside, right? And so it's not really something that we think about, but when you start parsing it, and we talk about it like we are right now, that socialistic movement that turns into, it's not going to end up well. There's no good socialistic models out there where you take over a country and it turns into a wonderful, gleeful, blissful kind of economy where everyone wins. And I think what they do is they manipulate that population to get in control. Once they get in control, those rights then erode to the point where now in Venezuela, if you say, hey, listen, I want my rights back or whatever, they're going to be like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Or a general stands up and says, well, what are you doing? They're going to be like, sit down or we're going to kill you. And they put him in prison, they kill him. That's just the way it goes. So that's what's happened in Venezuela, because they want power, like all these socialistic, communistic movements.
Let me ask you about that. You mentioned earlier that you've actually sat and talked with them, or you've met with some of the higher officials of, am I correct? The cartel themselves, right? The Cartel de los Solos. In some of in my notes, it says in the Maduro regime as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Remember, Maduro took over after Chavez died, right? So I left just before 2013. I was there in 2010 to 2013. And many of those members carried over to the next regime, right? So it's the same people in those roles. And, I remember, I won't say which one it is, but we were doing an extradition of an individual that I helped capture. And it's not just going out and arresting someone there. You just don't go out and say DEA, or have a policeman with you. It's just not the way it works. I can give you an example in a little bit, but And I remember I had all these armed men surround me on the tarmac, and this one general, I won't say his name, but he had approached me and he's looking at me, and he said, "So you think you're pretty smart, right? You think that I'm a criminal, don't you? You think all these things." And I'm just looking at him, right? I'm not going to give him anything. There's nothing, for me to give him. And he said, "You just need to watch yourself. Be real careful." I'm like, "Thanks for the advice." I got on the plane and flew the guys to New York. I think this trip was actually New York. The C-pot with another cop killer that we got out of Venezuela, And so, they knew and they know exactly that the U.S. is waiting and chomping at the bit. I mean, listen, the indictments on these guys come out in 2020. You can look at it, right? And that Maduro has, I think, $15 million on his head, right? And then you have these other generals that, 10 million, 5 million, so they all know their time at some point will be expired and they're going to be snatched. And that's why they're so fervently hanging on to power in Venezuela.
Hey guys, I want to give a shout out to a company I've trusted for over 11 years, First Form. They make high quality supplements, protein powders, vitamins, performance products, everything you need to support your health, fitness, and recovery. Look, my weight goes up and down like a lot of us, but when I'm dialed in and focused on my health, these are the products I trust. Their Formula 1 protein powder is my go-to after every workout. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, hands down, is my favorite flavor. I use it after every workout and it tastes amazing. They have other flavors too, like salted caramel, red velvet, and chocolate mint cookie. Not a protein shake person? No problem. Their protein bars taste like candy bars, and my favorite flavor is cookie dough. All the First Form products are made here in the US. No junk, no sketchy ingredients, no BS. Orders over $75, ship for free, and if you don't love it, they'll actually give you 110% of your money back. Go check out firstform.com/Borderland now.
I had some friends who were actors from Venezuela, and they talked about how, the overthrowing of the government and Maduro and everything, and it just became pretty confusing. But you also hear a lot about gold, and we can get to that later. We can talk about it now. And does it tie into a lot of what's going on with the cartel? Have the leaders use that to gain power, because money becomes power in most of these countries, same as ours, it seems like. But is that something that has become a big part of their planning?
You know what? I think when you put it in perspective and you look at the illicit money that's coming in, right, from cocaine trafficking, protecting these terrorists and narcotics traffickers from other countries, because they're, listen, you might pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to harbor someone a month.
Mm-hmm.
One target. Well, you pay me. As long as you're paying me, we're good. So you get $500,000 a year, and then you parse that down to, if you're a general in the PNC, the National Police or whatever, comisario, whatever it might be, and you take your 50 grand from this guy and you give your chief, 20 of it, and then they give the other boss 10 of it. The other boss gets 5. Everyone's happy, and you could have 20 of these guys rolling at the same time. So it's a lot of money. Not to mention the cocaine trafficking and transit funds that are coming from Colombia and coming from the Mexican cartels that are operating in Venezuela. This is in the news. You could see it. I arrested a Zeta trafficker, right? Gloria Rojas. She was arrested back in the day in Venezuela. I won't get into the arrest too much, but I actually had a history on her that every time she would get caught down there, they extort $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 from her, right? So she was always getting out.
Yeah.
And this one time, she was arrested. I got a call and said, "Hey," from Miami, actually an agent in Miami called me and said, "We got her." I'm like, "What do you mean you got her?" I was a country attaché. You got to put everything through me, really, right? But you were, listen, you were with Uncle Sugar, Uncle Sam. You know how guys are. Agents and officers, man, they're hunting, right? And they might be like, "Well, I'm not gonna tell you everything." I was like, "Well, you didn't tell me shit in this case, right?" So what the hell's going on? We got her, man. It's all wrapped up, dude. Just do the teletype. We'll send it down to you and we'll get her out of there. And I'm like, oh, you of such little mind ease. I said, dude, she's going to be, she's going to pay her way out and you're going to be screwed. Where is she? He goes, you think she's going to, I go, I know she's done it like 3 times, right? I mean, we had a bunch of people on our radar, so we were prepared. So I go out to this house where they were holding her. As I'm walking up the sidewalk, I get a phone call from, I don't think he was Venezuelan. I think it was Cuban. And he's like, turn around and leave right now. You're going to die. Right?
No way.
And I was like, all right, bro. I turn around, calmly walk. I had a little Glock with me. That's it. Right? I'm going to meet cops. These guys aren't cops, man. These guys, I mentioned it in another video, they're killers, right? Most of these cops are killers. Not all of them. Not all. But most. So I get in my armored car, put it in drive. I call Miami. I said, she's gone, bro. What? No way. I'm like, you know what? The next time, we'll do it right. And we did, because I had contacts from the press when she was arrested. Next time she came down, they went in live with cameras and it was broadcast to everyone. So they just couldn't let her go. And one of the generals from the Cartel de los Soles, when I went to the police station, I showed up, he's looking at me going, you son of a bitch. He's looking at me, right? And I'm like, you know, okay. But I mean, that was the typical thing. That was the Zeta cartel in Venezuela. She was the accountant for a Colombian trafficker, and they were moving money and so forth back and forth from Mexico for the Zetas, right? And this happens with all the cartels, because when you have a transit country like that, you know, so close to Colombia, you got to bring money back home, right? You got to ship the goods. You got to have contacts. You have to have communication. And they would send emissaries down and wait for the loads. And if the load didn't arrive or something happened, they, smoke the emissary and things like that. But yeah, that was pretty common to have a variety of traffickers in Venezuela.
So when you say variety, like there's records of a lot of Mexican cartels operating in Venezuela.
When I was there, they had just started opening up flights to Mexico, direct flights. So whenever I see direct flights to Mexico from some of these countries, because it's not really a tourist, Venezuela is not known for the tourism. Let's, come enjoy Venezuela because it's so safe here. No, I mean, it's freaking dangerous, right? So when I see, why are Mexicans going to want to go down there? Is commerce occurring in Venezuela? There's not a whole hell of a lot of commerce in Venezuela. So as those flights were gaining steam, I started, interesting. And we started seeing incidences of the different movements of different cartels, like, basically Sinaloa cartel, which is, at that time ran everything. Now we have a CG&G, obviously, kind of matching what's going on, probably going to overtake Sinaloa at some point.
Yeah. Crazy. And how about other foreign governments? China, Russia, Iran. Is there evidence of them spending time there as well and kind of using all this to their benefit?
Yeah, so let's look at China, right? A lot of people, will ask, well, what's the biggest threat to the United States? And some will say southern border, some will say fentanyl, some will say whatever. China is basically the double whammy, okay? You have, it's triple, quadruple whammy. I mean, I could sit here and list all day long. China is going to be the biggest threat to this country because who was providing all the fentanyl for the Mexican cartels, right?
China.
Who was moving the money? Who was implementing cryptocurrency in movements with money in China for Mexican cartels? China. Well, Venezuela, they have obviously strong diplomatic relations with China because China has basically been making a move from everywhere in Peru. When we're talking about structural funding, right? We're talking about infrastructure in these countries. Go to El Salvador. When was the last time you were in El Salvador? Go to El Salvador. You're going to see, holy cow. I mean, you see huge, stadiums going up, water projects. Go to Peru. You're going to see where they're buying police officers and military equipment for the locals there. Go into Colombia, Panama, China is all over Mexico as well, right? Legitimate, diplomatic mission stuff. Well, in Venezuela, you have huge Chinese embassy. I've been outside of it. It looks like it's actually like a prison camp when you see it, but that's how they build their embassies, right? So are they really keeping people out, or are they keeping the diplomats in? I can't really tell sometimes. But then you have the Iranian embassy. The Iranians dock their boats in the ports, northern ports of Venezuela. Russia flies their strategic long-range bombers, and they land in Venezuela. Cuba, and when you look at, listen, I'm going to say this cautiously, but when you look at Cuban intelligence in Venezuela, they took the Russian model, converted into the Cuban-Russian model, and then gave it to the Venezuelans. And when I was working there, you would have guys, generals, that were subservient to a lieutenant or a captain that was Cuban, because he was an intelligence officer, okay? So you have this weird collective kind of intelligence, diplomatic, and then you have a safe haven for criminals and different monies and things like that. And, Venezuela tried to get the petro cryptocurrency, which didn't work out well for them, right? But so you have this myriad of different things that's occurring in Venezuela with all these different rogue countries. And I mentioned before, the passports, the identities, it's a safe haven for these individuals.
When you were down there, was the Tren de Agua ever even a thing? Was it even part of the conversation, or did that just become more prevalent after?
No, it was there, but you have to
Really?
remember, you have what's called colectivos. Colectivos are almost like when you break up like Antifa groups, the guys going around with the black, they're used to playing Call of Duty until, they get arthritic at age 26, right? Well, look at a collectivo, kind of like an Antifa, right? Which they're kind of used by the government to kind of keep things at bay with the population, but they're kind of hated by the government. And that's in the same vein when you have Tren de Aragua. They kind of started working back when they started the railway projects in Aragua, okay? Infrastructure, socialism. We're going to pump money into Aragua because when you're looking at Tarek El Asaime, this guy that I'm the only guy that's ever met him, right? He was the governor there at the time, okay? And then you see this criminal group rise up with all this money. Yep. And then you think they're going to be allowed to operate without giving a little piece of the action to the police and to the government? I think not. And when you look at the recent activity through DOJ and you read about the FTO designation, the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation, and you'll see Tarek El Asaime's name in that document. That's not by mistake, right? So this is all public information you can look at, but when you don't have it in a perspective, you might say, I didn't even know who this guy was. Well, His name's mentioned in 2025 documents for an FTO designation of a gang that's basically infiltrating into America, which is the name of my book, Infiltrate America. And so you reel it all the way back, and you have it linked to a government official that later became the Minister of Justice and the Vice President and then the Maduro regime.
Oh my goodness. Well, real quick, you mentioned your book. Tell me about that real quick.
Infiltrate America is basically a book that was more of a passion project rather than, it's kind of a niche book because I saw this gang activity happening and I was like, I actually have it right here. And shameless plug. And so, I said, well, people don't know anything about these Latino gangs, right? Like what's Mara Salvatrucha? What's 18th Street? What's La M? What's Tren de Aragua? What are some of these other gangs that are in Brazil and so forth? And I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm retired. Well, I got time on my hands. Let me write a book. So fast forward 7-8 months, and then I came out with the book. And for people to kind of get an overview of what are these gangs? What's the foundation? What's the history of them? And what do they do in the United States as of 2025?
If you're into quality gear, you need Tac Pack, a monthly subscription box loaded with tactical gear from the top brands like Battle Arms Development, 9line, 511, and more. You can choose from Tac Pack Standard, $59.95 shipped with $90 to $120 worth of products, or Tac Pack Plus, $139.95 shipped with $240 to $300 worth of products. This September, Tac Pack Plus is stacked with over $330 worth of gear, including Battle Arms Development, 9line, and Next Level Armament. Use code Ironclad at TacPack.com for a free $70 tactical gift, pushing your value past $400. Tac Pack, gear you'll actually use.
Is there, you spend a lot of time there with the CIA as well. You guys doing whatever work you guys do, but is there some blind spots in our kind of intel that we can kind of improve our not just relationship but the information, trying to slow down? And I ask this question because if you use Trinidad and Agua as like a case study, they were able to kind of infiltrate America really fast. And there were some thoughts that they were being supported by the government, financially backed by the government, and as well as, the concerns from other FBI agents some FBI agents that we interviewed was like, they are kind of moving at lightning speed and infiltrating America. And like, it's kind of the separation and also the threat level. Is there something that we're missing or something we missed in years that we probably could have cut this off from happening to what we have today?
So I think the key in this is you have to have primary, secondary, tertiary event planning, right? It's just like any operation, okay? When we had these gangs that were starting to really, really come out, say in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, I was in Guatemala. I did a tour in Guatemala, and I saw these gangs and how they would go back and forth whenever the heat was on them. And no one knew who the hell they were in the United States, right? And then they just kind of slither back to Central America and crawl into a hole in Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, and then just get some new papers, show up in the States. And if they hadn't been arrested physically and had fingerprints taken, we had no clue who they were. So I was like, this is bullshit, right? So I started going out to the prisons, to the Fiscalia, to the different police agencies, and I started getting all this bio data from them, photographs, fingerprints, tattoos, pictures. I would go to the coroner's office. I would look for different family members, all these different, we could try to verify and put a little bit of veracity on who we're looking at and what we're doing, right? The FBI later picked up on that. DEA said at that time, and this is pretty key, we don't work gangs. We don't give a shit about gangs. Give it to the FBI. And I was like, man, you got to be kidding me, right? So we did. Now, they did take it. They developed it, right? And then now we have a myriad of different types of programs to track. But what happens is when you have gaps in intelligence, whether it be in Venezuela, whether it be in Nicaragua, whether it be in Argentina, wherever it might be, you have to have human sources. You can have SIGINT, you can do all these fancy things, technology. Nothing is going to give you what you really need like a human source. And that's what made DEA so great when you have 67 countries that they're in. DEA is getting rid of that, by the way. They're taking away all these foreign offices. I don't know if they're going to have them doing, Title VIII immigration stuff for the next 30 years. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But, we all have to define a mission at some point. We got to prioritize whatever's going on. And I get right now we have to kind of, get on it and make sure that we're taking care of the biggest and baddest that are illegally in the country. But my God, I mean, now I think we're going to suffer when you take an agency that's bread and butter is overseas and the intelligence that they glean and you remove that, it's going to be a very big gap because the FBI has things overseas as well, but they're legates, right? So, and you have teams of FBI guys that doing things overseas, but most of the legate teams are like ALAD and legat, two guys, right? And they're really not out there combing it. Like in Colombia, you might have 70 guys, 70, right? That work with all the different police units in the country. Mexico, we have like 12 or 13 offices in Mexico, right? So the FBI has a Res 6 in Mexico that works drugs with DEA and some other things, but it's going to create a need to augment these other agencies and then get everything that we need in these foreign countries. Because if we don't have that human intelligence, we're going to be dead in the water. And that's where I see the biggest gap in what we have. And, another thing too, and this probably better than anyone with your contacts on the border, you had 4 years of these guys sitting on their hands. They weren't doing anything, literally. Like, oh,
Yep.
hola, pasa, adelante, like, hey, dude, it's all good, right? And they did that for 4 years. Well, ramp that up and get out there and make cases right away. It takes a while to kind of warm that up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I think there's been some transition struggles from, I think just even the communities watching even ICE do their job now, it's a little odd because like, wait, what are they doing? That's not, it's just different. It's a whole transition that the, agencies are dealing with as well.
Sure.
What are some of like the concerns you have with Venezuela, just in the focus on Venezuela alone, the concerns for long term when it comes to America, the border, drugs, and potentially corruption with the cartel in Trinidad? Like, what is the biggest fears like, in your head?
I mean, when we look at it from a gang perspective, you have Trinidad that basically spread from Venezuela in their infancy, and they started taking over. Especially, I mean, look at some of the history. Just kind of go Google it in Chile. They were creating just absolute chaos in Chile. You know what I mean? And the same thing in Colombia, the same thing in Central America. And then they go into Mexico and they say, okay, we're going to kind of parry off all of these immigrants that are coming up here, and we're going to tax them. We're going to kidnap them. We're going to ransom, move dope and other things that we need to do to make money. And when they came to the U.S., next thing you know, they're in like 24 states. And they're taking over apartment complexes. And then you have the governments in those towns, the mayor saying, there's no problem here. Drende who? Aragua? I don't even know what you're talking about. Oh, 6 months later, sorry, actually, we do have a problem. They did have rifles and they were taking over compounds. But we got it under control. It's all good, right? Semi-peaceful protest, right? So in the gang aspect of that, and when you look at the aggressiveness of what Trump has done, Tom Homan, going out there and just kicking ass, right? Because if we don't get a hold of it immediately, what happens? The same thing that happens in the prisons now, right? You have all the different gangs that are, look at La M, tens of thousands of members of La M and MS-13, 18th Street, and so forth, right? They go in there, they fall right under La M. Even when they're in the street, they fall underneath La M on many things with the shot callers and so forth. So we had to cut that immediately, or that's going to be embedded not only in our normal society, our free society, but also in the jails, right? And then we're paying a whole new set of problems. And that's just the gangs. So when you look at the narco trafficking and the money laundering, what's going on in Venezuela, and the harboring of fugitives in Venezuela, we have people we cannot get our hands on because they're hiding out in Venezuela. So we have these prolific criminals, to include Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and you have other high-level Interpol, red noticed individuals that are hiding out there as well. And then, you have all these terrorists that go there to hide out, whether they're Iranian, whether it's Hezbollah. I commented on one of the national news prints a while back on Hezbollah in Latin America. This is just the tip of the iceberg we're talking about, okay? And when you start implementing military movement pieces of the puzzles, whether it's aircraft or Navy or whatever it might be, that's just what we're seeing on the surface, right? So we're seeing a boat, a frigate, whatever it might be, or a plane landing. That's a huge signal of a geopolitical power entity coming into our backyard saying, we're here, screw you, you're not going to do anything. And guess who our buddy is? It's, Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. So the Chinese are there, the Iranians are there, the narcos are there, the money launderers are there, the gangs are leaving there and coming to the U.S. So, it's a true cluster, coming out of that country. And at some point, it's going to have to be dealt with.
Yeah. When you say it has to be dealt with, do you think that we have to kind of go direct, get to there? Or is it just laws that we implement into our government as they cross the border illegally, which most likely would be happening?
In 2025, we don't have the luxury because we have to deal with Mexico. Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right? So we have what's going on in Ukraine, we have what's going on in Iran, and we have Mexico. And Mexico literally is a threat away from collapse in a sense. And you're not going to hear people say, well, it's not really that bad. Well, yeah, it is, because Mexico, unfortunately, from the top all the way down to the bottom, is putrid. From government officials, politicians, you name it. They're selling their souls, not all of them, but damn well most of them. And so that's creating, and has created for the last 30 years, the biggest problem that we have, because we're neighbors with these guys, right? So
Yep.
we have, 1 million people in the last 12 years or whatever that have died from fentanyl overdose. And what were we doing with it? What were we doing? Oh, don't do that, Mexico. Please. Oh,
Yeah.
China, please, come on now. I mean, so, going to Venezuela, I think at one point in Trump's first term, they thought about going into Venezuela and doing something with it and grabbing him. And I'll be honest with you, I think if you sent a carrier group down there with a bunch of, soldiers, they could probably clean it up in about 4 days. As long as we don't plant our stakes and our flag and say we're going to nation build, but we could go in there, do what we got to do, grab who we have to grab and get out, and it's going to be very minimal. But you still got to lose guys and gals, and that's what, they didn't want to do.
Yeah. I'd be interested in seeing if we were able to do that. That'd be nice. But, we don't even do that in Mexico right now.
Yeah.
to be able to
Venezuela would
get
be a
in.
walk in the park compared to Mexico.
Right. No, I got you. Is there one immediate threat from them that concerns you more than any other? What's the number one thing from Venezuela that is probably the top of your list of we should look at that first?
I think if we're looking at the exploitation of our country and being, in a sense, creating a permeable encroachment point for other countries, other nefarious countries to come into Venezuela and harbor themselves and to develop what they have to develop within the borders of Venezuela, so close to our backyard, is extremely concerning for me. And I think, you look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? And Cuba was right there. You don't need to be that close to the United States anymore to launch anything, right? You could do it with a sub. You could do it, So proximity, has changed. I'm not by any means an expert on military weaponry and missiles and so forth. But I think when you have a country that is so close to us, and you have a country that has a history of creating identities and providing a safe haven for all these criminal elements, to include terrorists and narco traffickers and killers and all this other stuff, that's reason for concern.
They were ghosts. Who are these guys?
I've never heard this before.
Right behind me, we have armed police. They're ready for sort of riot patrol.
I'm Sean Ryan, and I'm hosting the new Ironclad original, Target Intelligence PSYOP.
We're not framing history correctly.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
It's an Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
Man, it's funny. We just haven't talked to enough people about that area. Mexico is just such a, like you said, proximity is the immediate threat. You learn in the military, the closest threats, is who gets the focus. But seeing how Trinidad Agua has kind of spread, that became a concern for a little while, and then it kind of died off. Now you don't hear about it as much. Obviously, our borders are a lot more secured than they were before, so we're probably getting less infiltration of that. I haven't heard at any point that Cartel de los Soles is here? Has there ever been documentation or any kind of proof of them, one of their, who knows, one of their military kind of personnel or anyone coming to America and being apprehended and identified?
Well, we actually have one that I used to meet with. He's actually in jail in New York.
Really?
Yeah, Hugo Carvajal Barrios. I can't talk about anything with him. He just pled guilty. He's looking at 30 years in prison. His sentencing will be in October, and I look forward to maybe even being present at his sentencing.
Wow. And so he was someone that was part of your work, was either an informant or whatever the case, but that was a relationship that you had throughout your career.
He was a contact that I had. I can't really get into it. Yeah, yeah.
Man, it's interesting. Like, again, we don't hear a lot about that at all, and which makes it even more interesting. It's fascinating. Well, tell me anything else that you want to add. Is there something that you'd want to, obviously your book, we'll plug it again before you leave, but is there something that, you've just been wanting to tell the audience, or something that you want to leave us with?
I think when the public looks at what's happening with law enforcement and the controlling of what's happening in the country with these illegal immigrants, and people are saying what's happening, and I want them to look at the response of what the politicians are doing, how they're responding, and who is coming out in these demonstrations and what they're doing. We just had the arrest of the 10 individuals that were going to lure ICE agents out and kill them. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, these are the same kind of sets of characters, obviously not the exact same people or sets, but same similar kind of like Antifa-esque characters that are coming out with the black fatigues and the umbrellas, and they kind of come like out of a old Batman movie or something like that. They're a bunch of kids that really, I don't even know where they're coming from, right? But they're seeping out of the cracks, and they're attacking and planning the death of federal agents, right? And that elicited response is something that I want the public to look at and say, is this really where we want our country to be? So we are enforcing our immigration laws. You might not agree with it, right? But as with anything, if you don't agree with it, vote out the individual that's in there, because sooner or later, the cycle's going to flip back to the other side, because that's what we do in this country, right? And so when you're looking at all these law enforcement officers out there, they're not just going after the bad guys or the people that are legally here and not bad guys. They're just illegally here. Because listen, I've lived in Latin America half my life. I have family in Latin America. And I'm telling you right now, many of these people, many of them just want to come here and have what we have, because we don't know how lucky we have it in this country to have the opportunity to make money, to have a business, to have a lot of the freedoms, to have the rights, and be able to, with a disciplined approach, do something with your life. They don't have that. So they try to come here, but the law is the law, and the codes are pretty damn clear. If you don't have legitimacy here, you're going to be kicked out. And if you don't like it, vote the person out that's making the declarations at the time or enforcing the law. And don't go after these law enforcement officers, because they're the same ones that are going to stop a terrorist. They're the same ones that are going to stop a killer. Look at Bortek. They go out all the time. They were helping in Texas with that guy he was some loose madman north of Houston that was shooting people. And who'd they call? They called Bortek out, because those guys are really sharp. They went out and took care of business, right? So it's true. All of these agencies, whether it's FBI SWAT, whether it's DEA SRT, whether it's Border Patrol with, Bortek, whatever. All these groups their only job is not to do Title VIII immigration enforcement. And if we allow our country to slide into a state where we just let anyone in and anything goes, we're not going to have a country. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in my law enforcement career, not just as a DEA agent, not as a lieutenant over counterterrorism with, the Seminoles, not as a sheriff deputy working the streets in a patrol car or in private sector work. I recognize what we have, and people really have to stop and think a little bit, get out of that partisan kind of atmosphere and say, there's good and bad to this and kind of evaluate it rather than just say, well, he's a Republican, screw him, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been hard to watch the lack of I would say understanding of what the immigration law and what legal authority we have. I wrote a little blog about the dangerous use of words that the media is using, and not even just media, just the public calling, detention, concentration camps, calling an apprehension a kidnapping,
Yeah.
and it becomes very clouded in that the audience who's trying to look for information only gets propaganda, only gets false narratives, and which pulls people even more so divided and even more so lost in this misinformation, and it becomes a very dangerous road, a very dangerous path. And I wish we had more education for just the layman individual who just doesn't know how the immigration process works, because right now people are emotionally tied to this and they're just jumping at the emotional aspect of it, but no facts. And it makes it hard to communicate. I have a lot of people inbox me with hate and threats. And I'm like, I didn't even pick a side. I'm just telling you what the immigration law is. That doesn't mean I picked a side, because I don't want to be part of the argument. I want to be part of the education of it. And it makes this really challenging, because then people start to, these groups, these one-offs that are, even the border agent recently, the Bortec was able to, get the upper hand on an active shooter in McAllen. It's, that guy is only, following a belief, an emotional belief, but he was wrong. Those narratives are false. And it's creating this monster in our country that becomes very dangerous, where, these small little pockets keep happening. It just further destabilizes what we have.
Yeah. And I think the key word in this, to be honest with you, I'm going to throw this out there and I want to know what you think, but sophistry. Sophistry is what killed the Romans in a sense. Obviously, they overextended financially and they collapsed with corruption and so forth. But when you look at the sophistry of what's these politicians, how they speak, what they term as this or that. I mean, you will actually have, politicians who, and I won't say the names, who might be of Jewish descent, and they're actually supporting Hamas. And you're like going, wait a minute. If that doesn't capture what sophistry is, and the words they're using to try to manipulate and trigger and elevate tension, and all this twisting and turning, and it's happening at every level of our government and every level of social media as well.
Correct. And we're in a time where there's more information available to us, but a society that's not very good at deciphering truth and false.
That's right.
Dangerous times.
Yes, sir.
Man, sir, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the education on, a cartel and a country that, we don't speak on very often in this show. And I think it's going to be awesome for the audience to hear something in a different kind of light and a different conversation. So thank you so much. You want to talk about where people can find you, where they can find your book?
Sure. They can just go to infiltrateamerica.com. That's the website for the book, but it also has contact form on there to get a hold of me. And it has some video on there you can watch and kind of check out what the book is about. My other book will be out next year. That's going to kind of chronicle my career and some other things that I've done with a lot more detailed things I could talk to, obviously, when some of the cases have been disposed and so forth. And that's going to go through a lot of things in my life. I was paralyzed when I was 31 years old. I recovered. I wasn't supposed to walk again. And then the next 3 years later, I'm in the jungles of Guatemala and helos flying missions. So mindset, going after it, all these things that, I truly do believe in, and service to our country. I mean, we both served. Even if you haven't served your country, serve your community in some facet, because that's what America's about.
Thank you for listening to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original, presented by First Form. Go get your multivitamins, go get your greens, go get your reds, go get your protein. It's all there for you. If you need anything, that is a community that you would love outside of their supplements. It's just a very solid community. Go check them out at firstform.com/borderland. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.